Welcome to the Daryl Hall and John Oates radio special. Daryl Hall and John Oates have covered a wide range of pop forms in the past 10 years. Their new album, Voices, carries on that tradition of variety. One reason for their various styles in the past was their affiliation with a number of different producers. This time around, though, Hall and Oates produced the Voices album by themselves. Voices marks yet another stylistic departure for Daryl Hall and John Oates, which they'll talk about later in the show. But now let's listen to some new music from Daryl Hall and John Oates.
Baby, how does it feel to be back? How does it feel to be back? How does it feel?
Daryl Hall.
We had a good idea what we wanted to do with this album. We had a plan on this. First of all, we produced it ourselves, so just for that reason, we had to put that kind of thought into it, because we didn't have anybody else to rely on as an outside party, which is probably the best thing we ever did. And we had the idea, which we've been trying to do, of this really raw, basic sound with no overdubs. It was basically just rhythm tracks. Since we have different styles within the album, which have always been kind of confusing as far as direction goes, I always thought, on albums. So I learned something from my album, the Sacred Songs album, which I transferred to this album. Was on the Sacred Songs, I used the Frippertronics as the tying influence to tie all the varying styles together. There was one element that was maintained through all the various things that happened. And what we did is we decided to use voices, our own voices, which I think is our trademark, what it is about us that makes us different than everybody else, and use that as the unifying factor. And so we made, obviously, a great use of the voices. And in some cases, even louder than the lead track, the voices came out. And so that's where the name came from, and that was the whole concept of it.
John Oates.
I think the producer as the auteur, like the director in films, that really developed in the 70s. We had an ongoing battle with all our producers from the very beginning to get our point of view and our sound across. And, sometimes it worked, sometimes they helped, and most of the time it was a detriment. And throughout the 70s, that's all we did was jump from producer to producer, never quite feeling comfortable and never quite clicking with what we felt was the right sound for us. And now we're doing it ourselves.
After we finished the album, I was in the Mud Club, and I heard You Lost That Loving Feeling, and for years I had heard people say, you guys sound like the White Righteous Brothers. So I heard this and I said, wow, it really does sound a lot like John and I. And I thought, okay, sounds like us. People talk about the Righteous Brothers. I hear it in the Mud Club, which is definitely a barometer of what's cool at this particular time and place. If we're ever going to do it, it's time to do it now. So we went in the next day and cut it in about 5 hours. It was definitely an afterthought.
Yeah.
A lucky afterthought, I might add.
Right. Inspiration comes at 4 a.m. downtown.
Yeah, after about 19 scotches.
The Daryl Hall and John Oates radio special will continue right after station identification. Welcome to the second half of the Daryl Hall and John Oates radio special.
I think we had a war with the 70s, at least the 70s style of music making. It was really very studio-oriented, as divorced from live playing. It was very make use of all the new technology that happened in the 70s, because just about everything that happened in electronic music, when I say electronic, I mean synthesizers, 24-track studios, all these different things, all the different gadgets and technological advances really did happen since 1970, and I think for a while people just made use of everything as it came along, and about 1976 or so it got really overblown, and we got caught up in it because we were involved in what was going on at the time, and I was more into a more simple form of statement.
We weathered the 70s, and we were lucky enough to have some hits that seemed to be in sync with what was going on. But I think the fact that we didn't have like really huge success in terms of record sales was probably because of the fact that we never quite fit in right in that mold. A lot of things have happened in the last 4 years, since the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s.
Right.
And that's paved the way for acceptance of a different kind of approach to music, an approach that we feel really comfortable with, that stark and lean, very bare, essential approach, which we've always liked.
Well, New York and London music is really what it is. I don't call it new wave because that's too broad a statement, but it's really New York and London music, and we're New York people, so we're part of it from that end, but that's what it is. It was people being brave enough in some cases, or non-talented enough in other cases, not to care about how much money they were going to make and just do whatever they wanted to do. And it's definitely worked to music's advantage, I think.
It's come back to like the early 60s with like songs and singles and things like that. It's very, very much like it was then.
The only negative thing I can say, just to give a little balance to it, is unfortunately, one of the bad things about it is that there's so much immediacy. There's no guarantees. Like you might have a 3 million selling record this time and sell 100,000 copies next time.
Yeah.
So, as Fripp says, you're constantly exposed to hazardous situations, which are probably the place where you think the best, the most clearly, and you also make the best decisions and probably make the best music. People, just because they reach a certain age or whatever, they think they know it all. Most people never really leave high school in their brains, and they deal with the world in a very superficial and neurotically teenage attitude, which is really pathetic. Especially when you start dealing in things like government and and in relationships. So that song's really kind of it's all those different kinds of situations where a little more maturity might help, but people refuse to evolve even though it's smacking them in the face. They just want to continue doing things the same way, relating to emotional situations, to social situations in the same way that they always did, because it's easy that way. And it's a very childish thing to do, and we should all grow up. It's time for us all to grow up.
Since we're very mature, we're able to see this, and we're able to comment on it
in our sage old age.
Right.
You've been listening to the Daryl Hall and John Oates radio special. This program was presented through the courtesy of RCA Records.
How does it